Hello everyone, thank you for coming. As Liz just kindly introduced me, my name is Tom Meadows. I'm a solutions engineer at JetStack. But I'm hoping for the majority of this talk, that shouldn't really matter, and I'll explain why in a second. I want to quickly address the elephant in the room, hence this lovely picture that I found on Unsplash of the elephant. I'm the elephant. The reason for that is I was not the person that was meant to be giving this talk. In fact, I wasn't meant to be here at the conference entirely. I'm going to explain that, hence the title of the talk, Why Am I Here? Hopefully by the end of this, you should have an idea of what my weird title was all about, and hopefully, I'm really hopeful, you'll get something out of it. So just to introduce you, as I'm the elephant in the room, no, I am not quite the keynote speaker that we just had before. I'm also not the amazing conference speaker that is Liz Rice. So if anyone came to see someone who has a big prevalence in the industry, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I like to think that's a lovely picture. My girlfriend took it and I'm very happy with it, but still that doesn't really give me much of credibility in terms of me giving this talk. I don't have any billion page visits, and in fact, I put 0.5 in terms of my public talks. I did get to do one KubeCon talk, but that was virtual during the pandemic. I actually got a talk accepted for KubeCon this year. Very excited. Wish me luck. Hopefully this is, woo, exactly, thank you. So I tried to look into this. This was only like a week or two ago. Keynote talk, which apparently this is for the platform engineering track. Very scary. What's a keynote talk? Well, we just got a great introduction from Jimmy. Greater importance is attached to the delivery of a keynote speech or a keynote address. You guys probably have as good of a guess as myself as to what I can give for a keynote talk. So as I was dumbfounded for ideas, I just asked myself the question, why am I here? So, why am I here? For context, I was meant to be going to SOOCon Navigate, which, to be clear, is an inferior conference to this one. Amanda, I've said it on record, I promise that is the case, and I will be here next year. Obviously, while I wouldn't be able to, unfortunately, come to this talk, I was accepted to give a talk at SOOCon Navigate, and I'd be sipping mojitos on the beach, which is nowhere near as watching the circus we saw last night and hanging out in the tents by the fire in the middle of London. I was devastated to not be here. I promise. The mojitos, I'm sure they would have been great, but they'd be nowhere near as good as this. Coming back to this picture, though, there's actually a bit of hidden meaning in this. It's not just because I look beautiful. I'm ever so vain. You might notice this picture wasn't taken in the UK. It was somewhere slightly more exotic. That place was the country of Cuba. Amazing country, going through a pretty hard time at the moment, but it was a very enlightening experience, and I went on holiday there in October of 2022. Now, maybe someone's put the dots together by now, but this is something that I only did 2.5 weeks ago. I was looking to get my ESTA, which is your visa-free way of entering the country of the United States as a UK citizen, and I discovered this on the FAQ. If a traveller is found to have visited Cuba after January 2021, the traveller is no longer eligible to participate in the visa waiver program. They must apply for a visa to enter the United States. If anyone's done the visa application process, I was scouring through the forms for hours, scrolling through Facebook from 2011 when I went with my mate, aged 12 years old, to New York, trying to tell them when the last time I went to the United States. Something like, I'm going to America, LOL, aged 12 years old on Facebook. Very good. Next visa appointment, 15th of May 2023. Not even close. So I was devastated. It was my first in-person talk, first opportunity to talk to people about what I've been doing over the last few years in cloud native and platform engineering. Also, I'm not gonna lie, the mojitos on the beach sounded pretty cool. Until I realized I can come here, which, as I said, is better than being at SOOCon Navigate anyway. And even more scary, I was asked to do this. So that's the story of why I'm here. But again, I don't think that I've given you much information that I think you could maybe come home with some greater meaning and some greater purpose. Here's my opportunity to do so, and hopefully I can succeed and give you a little bit of context and some food for thought that you can take with the rest of your day. I did a degree in electronic engineering. That's my background, and I also got the opportunity to work at a company called Intel for a year. It was an enlightening experience and took me from messing around with client computers and starting to move towards the enterprise computing space, which was sort of like, you know, the start of, I think, a big kid's playground. This is me in the lab. Hopefully I don't get arrested by Intel for breaching confidentiality rights for putting this photo on, so I'm going to skip right forward. But while I was in this amazing lab, which had no windows and smelt slightly, I was working with some amazing technologies that I was only just starting to get to grips with. I had my first opportunity messing around with Linux properly for the first time. I used Docker. I had no idea what it was. It was very confusing. This whole idea is it a virtual machine? Is it not a virtual machine? Very confusing to me. But finally, and this is sort of the technology that I felt like I got the grasp of enough and the most, was I was messing around with virtual machines. And VMware was the VMware technology that I had the opportunity to use and mess around with, gave me this real spark of interest. I can build stuff with this. And I can do so by consolidating it all onto one single piece of hardware. So my next step, I moved and I went to work at VMware. After all, they are the hypervisor titan. They invented the concept of virtual machines, or so I understood. I arrived, and as soon as I arrived, I thought, right, I need to get stuck in. The best way for me to learn is getting hands-on and messing around with stuff. I didn't know this philosophical quote before I started this talk. This is just to make me sound clever, but I liked it. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. So I was like, right, let's get cracking. Until I was met with the license key problem, which if anyone's played a large RPG game, it's kind of like finding all of the, when you're an employee of the company anyway, it's like doing all the side missions to find the people who have got the license keys in order to be able to use it and do the stuff. So I was hit with that problem right away. And as a young engineer trying to sort of cut their teeth on this new technology, or this new technology to them, this was a bit of a barrier. Not only that, hardware restrictions. Obviously, this is a lovely post by an amazing person that's got their nice little 2U home lab server. I don't have the space nor the funds, or in fact, these days, enough capacity on my energy bills in order to have a lovely thing like this. So, not only that as well, if I wanted to sort of get an understanding of how this technology worked in the back end, if I got more curious, there's no way that my employer was going to let me into that information. That was all behind lock and key. If I wanted the code, no chance, especially when it's me. You can't trust me anywhere near sort of this stuff at that time anyway. I didn't feel very welcome from a technological perspective. I felt everywhere I turned there were barriers that were preventing me from moving in the speed that I wanted to, which as a young ambitious person straight out of university, sure, was very fast, but it just didn't feel right to me. Until I was, again, at my employer, and I went to a talk, and they started to tell me about this thing called Kubernetes. As you might have already guessed, as I didn't really understand Docker, understanding Kubernetes was a whole new level of craziness for me, and I really didn't understand anything that they were talking about. It's the best way to run containers at scale. Sure, but what does that actually look like? They didn't really give me much of an idea of that. But one thing piqued my interest. It's open source. The code is available to everyone, and anyone can take part in its development. At that point in my life, I thought, well, I'm hitting all these problems and corners with the VMware stack, and I feel like making the progression I want to make isn't as quick in that space. Maybe this is a better route. Sure, it's open source, but at that time I thought, I'm not some crazy Linus Torvalds or like this open source wizard maintainer. How can I contribute? This idea of contribution was just sort of like a crazy thing to me. I didn't know much about anything really, apart from the best places to drink beer in the city of York, which if you need any advice on where to drink beer in the city of York, I spent 4 years there as a student. I know where to go. It's 4 years now, maybe I don't, it's kind of scary. Anyway, this idea of contribution, sure, but it piqued my interest. The speaker who was talking about Kubernetes said, oh yeah, and these guys that they set up Kubernetes, they've got this awesome podcast. It's called TGIK. Basically, a group of people go onto a podcast every week and they just talk tech. They explain the tech, they choose a new open source project connected to Kubernetes every week. They play with it and they describe it. It's all a lot of fun, you should join it. So Friday nights, 9 p.m, got nothing better to do on a Friday night, obviously. I jumped on. And funnily enough, I didn't understand a single word they were talking about. They're talking about replica sets and services and setting its tight load balancer. They were going through YAML and getting really excited about it. And I was like, I don't quite understand what they're going on about here. But there's one thing that I left with, and that was a sense of community. I was struggling to follow along. Things were confusing. And even to this day, everything's confusing. But there was one thing that I was left with, was that people were friendly. But not only that, people were encouraging. Getting that first bit of confidence to send that message in the chat asking a question you feel stupid. That's a really, I would think, sort of like scary time, because it's only one negative response away from feeling not comfortable. But it was the opposite of that. People seemed to care. They seemed to really care. All that matters was making and using great software. And if I was to go even further than that, actually no, there's one thing that is more important. At least at that time, what I got was that was incorrect. Educating and encouraging people mattered even more. So coming back to my learning journey, as I said, like this amazing Chinese philosopher quote that I won't go over again, but how was I getting on with this problem? This is another Reddit post from some amazing school student that managed to build their Kubernetes cluster for school research. Really awesome, but still, didn't have the means to be able to do this. So I was at a conference, not talking, obviously. As I said, this is unfortunately my first one. But I was at another conference while someone was talking about something I still didn't quite understand. And afterwards, we went for drinks, as at these sort of events we typically do. And I told them about my hardware problems and how I didn't have enough resources to build a Kubernetes cluster. And they said to me, kind. And I was like, no, like I can't ask nicely to my employer. They're not going to spend £10,000 on infrastructure for me. And she said, no. Kubernetes and Docker. You can run a Kubernetes cluster where each node in the cluster is a Docker container. If this means nothing to you, I implore you to give it a Google and have a look around, as it's really incredible. But at this time, that just left me even more confused and, to be quite honest, terrified. I didn't understand Docker. I was only starting to understand Kubernetes. Flipping it on its head and turning it around, I thought these people were honestly crazy. But then, which again was the other most empowering thing, is the person said to me, no, don't worry. Just go to the GitHub Quick Start. People invest their time to make sure that people like you can start up and get off onto their feet with this stuff relatively easily. And you know what? If you can't do it after that, please contact me and I'll walk it through with you myself. And that was, for me, the second pillar of this space, is accessibility. Anyone with an internet connection, to an extent, can take part. I don't need to be a certain kind of person, and I definitely don't need an agenda or a huge pool of resources in order to start walking myself through into this journey. All I needed was the motivation to be involved with the community and get involved. I definitely didn't need that small 12U home lab server. So fast forwarding over the years, I want to come to my third pillar of the journey that I'm explaining right now, which is endless learning. Over the years, from the point where I got my first kind cluster set up, all the way up until now, I felt like there haven't been limits. After a year or so of messing around with Kubernetes and failing, I was actually employed at a consultancy called JetStack, which is probably why I'm stood here today. They decided to take an opportunity to employ someone that had spent lots of time breaking stuff and not much time making stuff. And they gave me the confidence to keep pressing forwards. I spent the last 2 years working with Kubernetes and other technologies, open source-based technologies, and going to customers and building for them. And that has given me an incredible amount of learning experience. So going from, this journey for me has gone from that simple quick start all the way through to my first time I responded on a Slack message. Open source projects have Slack channels and Slack workspaces where you can talk and collaborate with people. And that first day where I responded and said, you know what, I've done this before, I can help you. That was a good opportunity to progress my learning. To the first day where I decided, okay, I do feel confident enough to look at the code. Those days of TGIK in the background of me not understanding and my learning starting to get to the point where I felt like I could be at that level. And for the applications I'd spent time learning and understanding how to use, I can now do that at the source level, which was incredibly empowering for me. Obviously, this isn't my PR, but I'm happy to say that this was the first PR in an open source project where I was able to collaborate. That day where I can progress my learning to actually changing the source code itself to help the project be better was very empowering for me. And even better, again, it's not 15 billion views a day of my amazing open source encyclopedia, but I started to progress my learning to doing stuff myself, writing small applications that solve small, albeit, I think, important problems. And people care. Sure, they might have only just done it once. They might have thought, well, it's kind of rubbish, but I see what it's trying to do. But they empowered me by giving me a star, and that was motivating for me. Where do I go from here? Well, I was at FOSDEM at the weekend. If anyone was at FOSDEM, raise your hands. Was anyone at FOSDEM by any chance in Brussels? Yeah, there we go, there's one. It was an amazing open source conference that's on every year. And I had the pleasure of meeting a man called Daniel Stenberg, who, quite honestly, I hadn't heard of before. He's the creator of curl. He has managed the project for over 29,000 commits. The project has 28,400 stars. The project is installed by default on Windows 11, Mac OS, Linux distributions. I think you'd be hard-pushed these days to find a computer that does not ship with it. This was first released in 1996. I was born in 1996. He's been managing this project longer than I've been alive. I'm sure for some of you that's absolutely terrifying, but I might as well just be honest and tell you the truth. What this means for me is that I'm in a space where there's no point in sort of thinking like my learning is going to stop. If I want to, I can find endless opportunities to carry on my journey. If you feel like you are starting your journey and you want some help getting into the open source, there is a fantastic talk coming later on from Martin Hickey. He's going to talk to you about how you can pave your way to being an open source maintainer. I found this talk very valuable for myself. He's got a great phrase that's chop wood and carry water. I won't spoil it. I'll leave you to see the talk yourself so you can make your own decisions on it. So what happens when you put all these three things together? In my opinion, and of course all of this is just my opinion, my experience, it's innovation. After all, try and be a crazy inclusive group, crazy inclusive mob driven by curiosity to do the next big thing. And if you want evidence, take a look at some of these projects. These are, group organized drives to build the next big thing. You've got the Kubernetes project, which I've explained already. Spiffy is an amazing project for machine identities. You've got SigStore, which is trying to change the way that people are signing container images. eBPF, which I don't need to say anything about because Liz will do a far better job. Nix, which is an amazing, crazy build system that does basically everything. I use Nix, by the way. Argo is an amazing project for CI/CD and data-driven and all sorts of other things for workflows. Containerd for running containers, Linux, it goes on. I don't feel like there's any opportunity for me to not find innovative spaces in this industry. Another example is Prometheus and Thanos if you're interested in metrics and observability, which is why, if you are, you definitely need to go and check out Bart's talk about 5 whole years leading the Thanos project. So, to sum up, I've said a lot of stuff, but why am I here? So the reason why is I hope that open source will win in the cloud age. If you want to hear more about that and get Peter Zaitsev from Percona's take on that, he's doing what I hope will be a fantastic talk about the cloud of freedom against the cloud of serfdom and why open source, he thinks, will win in the cloud age. Open source is making the world of software a better place, and I want to be involved with that. One of the most amazing young engineers I've ever met, Simon Dukniechek. Again, he tried to teach me his surname, but I really struggle with it. Him, along with his colleague Dan from Avanade, they're giving a talk about something called the Carbon Awareness SDK, Carbon Awareness API and the Carbon Awareness SDK, which I got to see a talk about a couple of months rather. Absolutely fantastic, and I feel it embodies an example of something that would never, something sustainable and positive that would never happen without the open source community. Again, there's enough innovation here to keep me busy for a lifetime. I hope that when I get older, I can get to the point where I can work and contribute in and out of open source projects to keep me happy well into my old age. And finally, I want to be part of this community. all of the examples that I've given, I want to be a part of that, and I definitely don't want to stop learning along the way. This quote, I feel, embodies like what I feel about working in open source, at least for me, and that is, I am always doing that which I cannot do in order that I may learn how to do it. And I promise you, if anyone in this room feels like they can't do something, that is how you should stay for the rest of your life, because you will learn amazing lessons along the way. And you know, if you do it in open source, I promise you, it should feel even better. So ask yourself, why are you here? This is what I want to leave as some food for thought for the day, as I don't quite know as the keynote speaker what else I could possibly do. But not only that, what are you going to do after today, after you've thought about why you're here? What are you going to do to drive forward that why? It could be open source, it might not be open source, that doesn't matter. But hopefully, it will in some way make open source a better place. Thank you very much. I hope I've left you with some food for thought that will sort of spur you on with your day. Thanks.